Today we are talking about Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. This is one of those books that people recommend endlessly, usually with a very calm face and a very vague explanation of why it's good. It's often described as spiritual or philosophical, which already scares a lot of people away. But Siddhartha isn't a book about becoming enlightened in the religious sense. It's a book about being lost, making the wrong choices, and slowly understanding yourself through failure. Before getting into the review, here's a brief synopsis. Siddhartha follows the life of a young man named Siddhartha in ancient India who is deeply dissatisfied despite being intelligent, respected, and spiritually gifted. He leaves his comfortable life in search of truth and meaning. Along the way, he tries several paths: asceticism, following the Buddha, indulgence in wealth and pleasure, love, despair, and finally solitude by a river. The novel traces his inner journey rather than external events, focusing on how each phase of his life shapes his understanding of existence. What struck me immediately while reading Siddhartha is how anti instructional the book is. It doesn't tell you what to do, it doesn't give you a method. In fact, it actively rejects the idea that life can be figured out by following someone else's answers. Siddhartha meets Buddha himself, someone who has genuinely achieved enlightenment and still chose not to follow him. That moment sets the tone for the entire book. The message is clear. Even the most perfect teacher cannot walk your path for you. The idea feels uncomfortable, especially today, when everyone is constantly looking for mentors, systems, routines, and frameworks to copy. While reading this, I couldn't help but relate to Siddhartha's restlessness. That feeling of knowing you are capable of more, yet not knowing where to direct that energy. He isn't confused in an ignorant way, he's confused in a thinking too much way. He understands concepts but feels no peace. The disconnect between knowing and feeling is something that the book captures extremely well. One of the most honest parts of Siddhartha is when the story moves away from spirituality and into indulgence. Siddhartha abandons discipline and immerses himself in wealth, desire, and pleasure. And what's interesting is that the book doesn't immediately punish him for this. Life doesn't collapse overnight, instead, it slowly becomes empty. The slow erosion felt very real to me. Not dramatic, not tragic, just a gradual dulling. The kind where you don't notice you're lost until you already are. The turning point of the novel isn't marked by some grand realization, it's marked by exhaustion. Siddhartha doesn't change because he learns something new. He changes because he has lived enough to understand what doesn't work. That's one of the most grounded ideas in the book. Growth doesn't come from revelation, it comes from saturation. You try something until it has nothing left to give you. The river, which becomes central later in the book, isn't symbolic in a complicated way. It's simple. The river teaches Siddhartha that life isn't linear, that contradictions can coexist, and that you don't need to reject parts of yourself to move forward. That idea landed strongly for me. The book doesn't demand self improvement, it demands self acceptance, and that's a much harder task. Another thing I appreciated is how the book treats suffering. It doesn't glorify it, but it doesn't frame as a mistake either. Siddharth's worst phase, his greed, his despair, his failures, are not detours, they are essential. Without them, his understanding would be incomplete. That felt honest, especially in contrast to modern self help narratives that treat discomfort as something to eliminate as quickly as possible. Siddharth isn't a book that changes your life overnight. It's the kind of book that sits quietly in your mind and makes more sense the longer you live. What I took away from it is simple: no one can give you meaning. You can borrow ideas, but understanding only comes from lived experiences, especially the uncomfortable kind. The book doesn't offer solutions, it offers patience. It reminds you that being lost isn't a failure, it's part of the process. If you're looking for motivation, this isn't that book. But if you ever felt restless, unsure, or dissatisfied, despite doing everything right, Siddharth will probably resonate more than you expect. It doesn't tell you where to go, it just reminds you that the path is yours and always has been.